Hello again, and welcome back to Pitch Please. It's a show all about guiding you through something new. I'm your host, Jason, and in this episode, we're talking comics. But we're not talking about the big two. No, we're talking about a newer publisher on the scene, creator-owned DSTLRY Comics. Fancy. Roll the intro.
Pitch please, look at this thing, can you believe it? Pitch please, coolest thing that I've ever seen it. Pitch please, welcome to Pitch
Before I drill down into DSTLRY, let me show you my bona fides a bit and talk about my love of comics. As you can probably guess just from looking at me, I grew up on superhero comics. Shocker. As a kid, my neighbor's uncle used to sell comics for $1 each every year at their annual garage sale. It was mostly 90s trash, complete with wild body proportions and infinite pockets. With gimmick, 3D lenticular covers and the like, but I was 10, so those gimmicks really worked on me, and I was hooked. As I got older, I fell off superhero comics, for reasons I'll get into, replacing them with superhero movies and more adult, i.e. pretentious, graphic novels. I stopped reading DC and Marvel books so much and started reading stuff from Drawn and Quarterly or Fantagraphics and the like. As I got older, I also started to learn the stories of the people who made some of my favorite books and noticed a bit of a theme of them getting absolutely boned by the corporations they were writing for. I'm thinking of people like Alan Moore with Watchmen, Bill Finger with Batman, or Schuster and Siegel with Superman. It seemed that, just like the rest of the working class, the creatives I loved were being exploited by creating some of the most recognizable and profitable characters in fiction and never really seeing any fruits of their labor. You shouldn't be able to invent Superman and die penniless. It's all possible through a trick as old as the creative industry. In case you don't know, when you make anything for a big comic publisher, most of the time you're under contract with them. So whatever you create, it's theirs. You're just a hired gun. It's the same idea behind all the gig apps like Uber and DoorDash. It's a nice little trick to get out of giving people the benefits of being a full employee. The trade-off is that, theoretically, the corporation has the resources so that whatever you create will be seen by more people, and you'll get a bigger upfront check. Theoretically. Even if you aren't creating characters whole cloth, any story you write or picture you draw is theirs to do what they see fit with. So say, years down the line, there's a, multi-billion-dollar movie that is inspired heavily by something you created. While it may be really cool, you won't see a dime. This changed in the 90s when Image Comics came along. Image offered artists the chance to publish their work and keep the rights to whatever they created. Image wasn't without controversies. Chronically late books, tensions among partners leading to lawsuits, the 90s comic bubble crash, etc. It's almost like they had a bunch of artists in charge of a company. Weird. But the strategy seems to work out well for them in the long run. Now they're the third largest publisher out there and have put out some of the all-time most influential comics in history. We're talking Spawn, The Walking Dead, Invincible, goddamn Saga. It's a star-studded list. It's almost like if you give creative folks room to be creative, you have a higher chance of getting quality work. Crazy. This brings us to DSTLRY, which seems to be looking to replicate that Image success, albeit in a simpler, smaller, more modern way. DSTLRY was started by the guys behind Comixology, the digital comics reader. Another thing that Amazon has gobbled up and essentially destroyed. Now I'll be straight with you. I don't trust these suits as far as I can throw them. Unlike with Image, they are not artists. They are businessmen. Which means they are not in it because they like comics. They're in it because they like money. And businessmen are not to be trusted. That might be our first evergreen rule on this channel. Let's put it on the board. For example, while the company stresses that their digital collectible comics aren't NFTs, they certainly smell like NFTs. So before I go heaping praise on the books they've been pumping out, Let me be clear that just because they're a corporation that has realized that giving creatives that give their brand value a stake in the company, thereby aligning your well-being with their well-being, does not mean that they aren't still a corporation at the end of the day. Disclaimers aside, Distillery is making one business decision that I do agree with, in that they are copying that image model. Artists and writers are not only going to keep the rights to their creations, but the founding creators even earn equity in the company. So if their books sell and the company does well, they do well. Rising tides and all that. What that means is, say some all-consuming media conglomerate comes around and wants to make a movie based on, I don't know, Gone by the artist known only as Jacques. Then instead of the company who just happened to print the book and happens to have a relationship with Diamond Distributors raking in the dough, Jacques makes that money and, crazy thought, could even work on the movie based on the book he made. If only there was some way for all workers to get the value they create and own the means by which they produce that value in common. Huh. But for any of this scheme to work, you have to have some damn good founding creators and attract some big talent with big ideas. In a business dominated by behemoths, it's a steep uphill climb to even be noticed, so you need some heavy hitters. And in case of a few folks, whose name alone can move a few units. Well, between the founding creators and the folks currently slated to put books out on Distillery, it seems these business types went deep into their Rolodex to call in some award-winning titans from around the industry and world to write up a book or two, and have ended up with an absolutely stacked list of creatives. Kids, a Rolodex is this mechanical device we had before cell phones? Never mind. We have the likes of, and apologies if I pronounce any of these names wrong here, the aforementioned Jacques, Becky Clonan, Mark Bernardin of podcast fame, Jackie McKelvey, Scott Snyder, Chip Zdarsky, and on and on. This is a group of people that have put out some of the best comics this century, and here they are under one label, given what seems like free reign. At the very least, there seems to be no restriction on content, style, or genre. So far, hiring the best comic book writers and artists has paid off. Every book Distillery has put out as of writing has been good or oftentimes better than good. There's any genre you can dream of here. Except, notably, superheroes. From western to sci-fi to romance to heist, each with enough of a twist to get deep hooks in you. Plus, the art in some of these books is stunning. It helps that all these books come in an oversized magazine dimensions that really suck you into the artwork. I love a big old piece of physical media, he said in front of his 1,500 records. Admittedly, this does make them harder to store, but I think it's worth it. When you make something this size, it feels like a statement, like a celebration of the medium. Maybe it's the American in me, but bigger is usually better. I can hear you snickering. And these are some hefty comics. While the physical size of the books may be supersized, one thing I really like about Distillery is that each story is only 3 or 4 issues long, with the exception of Life, which is listed as being about 6 issues. But still, in the single digits. The big two could learn a thing or two from this approach. Actually, I think this is going to take us to a new segment. Side rants. Come join me in the old man corner. One of the things that caused me to fall off of superhero comics was the tendency for them to spin out into multiple books with long arcs over hundreds of issues. For example, I started reading the Ta-Nehisi Coates run on Black Panther month to month. It was a really interesting take on a character by a great writer who was from outside of comics. But then, that single book spun off into 3 books, and, if I recall correctly, was broken up by one of those crossover events that superhero comics love so much. I stopped reading because I simply didn't have the funds to collect that many books every month. It was just too much. And not just for me, but for you, the publisher too, judging by the amount of times you have to reset the continuity. It became unwieldy, and the story just kinda fizzled out. And for my money, the ending is the most important bit. So here's my pitch. Less is more. Instead of ongoing series with no real end, limit the story to a maximum 12 issues. The creatives pitch a story for a character that must include an ending. And that goes for movie producers too. People only remember the ending, so it's better to start there anyway. Then you stagger your books, so there's always something coming out, but in a way that there's always a new number 1 each month, and readers know there will always be a satisfying end to the story and a fresh jumping on point regularly. So it'd be like Superman, Luther's Revenge, 1 of 7 or whatever. And once it was done, new creative team, new story, new number 1. Everything as an interconnected collection of miniseries. Granted, it has been a while since I bought single issues, so Maybe the big two are already doing this, and I just don't know. I did read Absolute Batman #1 recently, and it appears all these Absolute stories will be miniseries. In which case, I'm really showing my ass here. All I know is, if there's a book with a lot of hype out, I usually wait for the collected softcover or the big hardcover if it's really special. Maybe that's just me and I'm yelling at clouds again. Anyway, rant over. Let's go back to what we were talking about. Okay, where were we? Oh yeah, DSTLRY's short and sweet runs. I love this approach as it's concise and means you always have something new on the horizon. But I will admit, it's a double-edged sword. It is a very hard thing to world build in 3 issues, especially if you're doing something a little more out there. Again, Gone, the book by Jacques I mentioned before, is a prime example. This book takes place in what seems like a deep, interesting universe with a lot of characters and factions I'd love to see more of. But with only 3 issues, you really only have time to focus on the one story you're telling. That's not to say Jacques couldn't come back and expand in further series, but maybe he'd rather move on to other things. In the end, it's always better, in fiction, movies, and playing music, to leave an audience wanting more rather than having them grow tired of you. And let me tell you, boy do I want more of these books. No matter what book you start with, you're gonna get quality. I'm gonna go over some of my favorites, but I'd honestly start with the first book they put out, The Devil's Cut. This compilation book serves as a great taste of everything they're doing over there at DSTLRY. It's like a bunch of trailers for these comics. You can read through this and figure out which stories you want to get or keep an eye out for. DSTLRY's only been around for about a year, so there's not so much backlog that you're going to be way behind. They only just started putting out collected hardcovers, so not everything in The Devil's Cut has been expanded into a full book yet, but plenty has. The first, Somna by Becky Clonan and Tula Lotte, is the story of a woman at the height of the witch trials, having an affair on her witch-finder husband with the devil, in her dreams. I can't do it, because I'll get a copyright strike, but if you could put the band Witchfinder General on in the background here while I talk about this book, that'd be ideal. If that synopsis doesn't do it for you, I don't know what will. I love how this book uses its setting and the supernatural to explore how society was, and let's face it, still is, openly hostile to women who dare to reach for power of any kind. And how other women, instead of coming together in solidarity, use that hostility to turn on other women. The addition of the actual devil only serves to bring out those gulfs between the powerful and the powerless. Plus, the art is fabulous, switching from a more traditional comic art style to the soft, watercolored look when the character is in the dream world. I won't spoil the ending, but while I liked it, I did wish it'd go a slightly different way. As always, I was rooting for everyone to burn. The second collected hardcover is a book I've mentioned a few times already, Gone by Jacques. I first became aware of Jacques when he did a book with Scott Snyder called Witches that creeped me the hell out. In a good way, of course. His art in that book was so experimental and different that it was hard not to become engrossed in the book. In Gone, Jacques is doing everything, so the art is a little more traditional, but still with great design and incredibly inventive page layouts and panel work. This world feels grimy and lived in, but with the scale of the future in its giant slums and looming ships. Making use of the large format book. The story is that of a kid who's trying to steal supplies from a luxury interplanetary ship, gets trapped aboard, stranded for possibly many years back on Earth. The ship travels at light speed, so it's your classic case of 1 year for her is 6 back home. Or is it the other way around? You know, that old Jim. The fact that they cover so much story in just 3 issues is kind of mind-boggling. There are many twists and turns and factions and politics that sort of get glanced off of in pursuit of telling the main character's story well. But as I mentioned before, I'd love to spend way more time in this world. Lastly, they just released the collected Blasphemous by Mika Andolfo. This is a story of a new religion secretly run by demons, using immortal pop stars to turn faith and worship into drugs. It's a wild concept, but also not so far-fetched if you've ever been around religion in your life. Especially here in the States. Just imagine one of those mega churches plus JoJo Siwa. The art is lovely and borders on cartoonish with big spreads depicting angels and demons in battle. The story was fun, but once again, it was a little lukewarm on the ending. It falls into the cliche I think a lot of big heady stuff like this falls into. High fantasy, sci-fi, cosmic stuff. It all gets to a point where it's so out there that only a MacGuffin of the twisted internal logic, a special sword, a spell, the right code, can reset the story stakes arms race that has been going on beforehand. In comics, it's usually in stories with cosmic multiversal enemies like the Anti-Monitor or Eternity. Other than that, I liked it a lot. It was the weakest of the three so far, but I still had a great time. That does it for the collected editions, so I'm going to quickly run through some of my faves of the number ones they've put out. Now, for these, I've only read the first issue, so if the ending sucks, I'm sorry, I'm waiting on the hardcover. Let's start with my favorite, White Boat by Scott Snyder and Francesco Francavilla. I don't have many fears. Some would say I have an almost complete lack of self-preservation. But one big fear I have is water. The last 6 times I've been in a body of water, I've almost drowned. So we have an understanding now, and I stay on dry land. I'm even nervous in the shower at this point. So I can't think of a worse place to be in when a Lovecraftian nightmare kicks in than on a cruise ship in open ocean. I've liked almost everything I've read by Scott Snyder. I wasn't big on Dark Knight Metal or The Batman Who Laughs. And he has scared me before with a comic I previously mentioned he did with Jacques called Witches. But this one feels like it's targeted right at me. Plus the Hellboy-esque tattoo-worthy art really adds to the atmosphere with its thick line work and jagged edges. If you're thinking of getting an almost cliché tentacle tattoo, get it in this style instead to mix it up a bit. I'm really excited to see where this one goes. And if anyone has an unsigned copy of the 7-inch they put out with this book that they can spare, slide into your boys' DMs. Next up, Life by Brian Azzarello, Stefan Phillips, and art by Daniel Zigelj. Again, so sorry if I mispronounce any of these names. I'm hopelessly white and American. Now this looks like any other DSTLRY release, except, what's this? What the hell? Which side is the front? Up is down, topsy-turvy! This is actually a cool way to tell the same story from 2 different angles. One side from the perspective of a band of criminals looking for a score on what they think is an abandoned planet, and the other side from the perspective of the mutant prisoners of that planet, with the 2 stories meeting in the middle. I had the first 2 issues because I think this, for lack of a better word, gimmick is so interesting. That's why I love small publishers. They have the freedom to experiment with the format in a way the big 2 would never. Gimmick aside, it's a cool villain-on-villain story that I'm actually going to collect all 6 issues of. That's like 12 stories! Talk about bang for your buck! Lastly, let's talk about Spectrograph by James Tyrion IV and art by Christian Ward. Like White Boat, this is another horror book, this time set around a billionaire's mansion. At least it's on land this time. And the cult dedicated to whatever he's building in there. Insert Tom Waits reference here. These billionaires are always up to no good. They are not to be trusted. In fact, let's update the board. The art is surreal, yet crisp, and like with White Boat, really sells how unnatural all the goings-ons are. The real estate agent, and all-around terrible mom, is really in for some deep shit for sure. Although the housing market is so bad, I'm sure I know a few people who would take the house, murderous cult and all, if they can get it for cheap. I hope this gets collected soon so I could really spend some time in this unsettling mansion. Those 3 are just my favorites, but honestly, every book that's come out so far has been good to great. I can't wait to see what comes next. They've recently announced, or already released depending on when I put this up, a few holiday one-shots and have teased some upcoming books that all look intriguing, even if I'm not familiar with any of the names attached. But that's actually what I would like to see from DSTLRY. Don't get me wrong, I can think of a few names I'd love to see do books for them. I'm thinking Sean Murphy, Crom, Alex Surritt, Ben Passmore, Kelly Sue DeConnick, Andrew McLean, etc. But the DSTLRY MO is great for new talent. You don't have to worry about a new team tanking sales on a popular character or shoehorning their take into a bigger continuity, and 3 to 5 issues is relatively not too big a commitment to take a chance. DSTLRY is what the world needs more of. Less big, risk-averse companies churning out sequels and remakes, and more smaller companies taking chances, making mistakes, getting messy. To paraphrase Miss Frizzle. It's been a banger year of books, and I can't wait to see more. Even if I'm very skeptical of the digital collectible side of things. Well, I think that about does it for this episode of Pitch Please. What are your thoughts? Have you read any of these books? Love them? Hate them? Let me know in the comments along with any other comics talks you want. Do all that normal YouTube stuff with the liking and subscribing and shit. And I'll see you in the next one where we're going to talk about film photography. But until then, death to the algorithm.
Death to the algorithm.